you'll be late at. You're gonna probably be like, watch this. No, it's all good. All good. Congratulations on your head. Looks like it's a good event so far. So far, I'm surprised. So you're really excited. Did you have a chance to check out the rest of the training yet? I just walked around and looked and was kind of yeah, immediately. It's swanky. I'm always a fool for stages. And show me a stage, I'm on awe. So it's really good. So we got time to hear your remarks, or we're gonna start simultaneously? Can you put the mic? We got time to hear the opening remarks, or I'm not sure what time the opening remarks are supposed to start. I think we're fine with it. I think the opening remarks starting at the same time. I'll grab the water. I grabbed it myself. Well, we're gonna have some pretty radical this weekend. Do you want a water?
He's coming right back up the wire, people, so you're good. You're streaming right now.
Yes, sir.
And it's called no name. Yep, everything's recorded the same way. I think that's the best way to do it.
I believe so.
I'm hoping to see some color. Just tell him that when Joe gets in here, he's anticipating a 3-mile on-road operating. Live in here. So, yeah.
Where are you going?
It's the Natural Chimneys State Park. It's kind of close to Harrisonburg, between Harrisonburg and Stockton. Don't know much
Yeah,
about it.
maybe in the mountains.
He thought he was here, he was hard to tell.
So many. Yeah, no,
I know. Laying your gasket for breakfast.
It helps. A friend of mine took a flight ride
So probably the MS-150.
it was like 100 miles.
Every city does its own MS-150. This is a motorcycle route. It's a little different.
Yeah.
I know one guy just went to the restaurant.
The off-road piece is going to be pretty cool. Has it been on the whole time?
Yeah. And the view comes.
It's low. It's just low. 150 miles.
Yeah.
Tutu, good morning. Welcome. Hey, hey. Tutu. Hey, hey. Cool.
Doesn't sound loud. Go ahead. That should be the same feed going. Historically, there's a lot of. When I stop in between sessions, and I start again, the record deck is just starting up. Stop.
Especially
I'm here to get to Mike.
Well, I think some of it is that you got a camp for this one, and some So, Joe, be aware we are going live now, so if you got any or whatever, it's on you.
Okay, good.
Can you help me put this here? It was coming, so we can put this side.
Teamwork.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Boom. Hold on.
Yeah, because I was a little uncomfortable sitting.
Does that feel better?
This felt better now.
Nice.
Yeah.
All look clean.
Good.
We're ready to get the
I think so. That's usually not a good thing in my life.
Yeah. Not this town.
Okay. We like being in the background.
Excited. We like to get to talk with a very select few people who care about it. I'm going to get out of here.
Great.
Is it Papneja?
Yeah.
Papneja. Great. I think we're ready to go. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending this session. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence today. So if anybody's got the wrong room and you're looking for cannabis, then this is not the right room. I don't want to disappoint anybody. So my name's Kamran Khan, and I'm a managing director at Accenture, and I'll talk about my role a little bit. The main feature of this session is going to be a panel, and I'd like to quickly introduce you to the three panelists that we have today. We have Panelists, who's the Vice President of Enterprise Analytics over at Nestle, Rob Stewart, who's the Manager of Smart Grid and Technology at Pepco Holdings, and Andrew Trueblood, the Director of DC Office and Planning. And so I'd like to thank you guys for being on the panel here today. Before we get onto the main event here, I'd like to just kind of set the scene. Quick show of hands, how many people are familiar with artificial intelligence and are using it in some way, shape or form in their work at the moment? Okay, so a handful of people. One of the things that I think about artificial intelligence is that there are so many different definitions of artificial intelligence. And so I'd like to just kind of talk about what it means to me and my group and what it means to us at Accenture. So I'm just going to walk you through a few slides if I can. Just going back. So first of all, let me just talk about Accenture. Accenture is, as you can see from the slide, a very large company, but there's some data behind this slide that's very interesting that I think will resonate with a lot of people. We now have 450,000 employees at Accenture. If you wind the clock back 10 years, we were a $22 billion company. We're now something just over $40 billion with half the number of employees. In that 10 years, the company has made a rotation away from its traditional business, which was really helping people implement large-scale technology like SAP. And we've rotated now to what we call the new, which is really working with technologies like artificial intelligence, cyber, cloud, and other technologies that are really important in the new digital economy. We've probably trained about 300,000 people on new technologies in the last 7 years alone so that we can take advantage of this disruption in the marketplace. My group inside of Accenture is called a Search and Content Analytics Group. And what we do is we work with technologies that are search, natural language processing, and machine learning to build applications that I'll talk to you about very briefly, just to give you an idea of what we see as AI. We have a practical approach in the group that I'm in because we have to deliver projects using technology. So I tend to break AI into two separate areas. I call it pure AI and pragmatic AI. And pure AI is really the stuff of science fiction in my mind. Skynet, Terminator, my favorite Blade Runner, where we're aiming to mirror human intelligence exactly. And that can be quite scary, and you hear that get mixed in with the whole AI conversation. But I found this research a couple of years ago that I thought was really, really interesting. And if you just look at the purple box, what this is saying is that we have a 50% chance of achieving full automation of all labor in 125 years. Now that might not be right, they may have been exaggerating that, but I think it kind of illustrates the point that we shouldn't necessarily be thinking about AI as a scary proposition. Pragmatic AI is different in that it's narrower and it's focused on a specific task, and in some cases it can actually surpass human intelligence, and I'm going to use some examples here. But the way that we look at AI is it's not one technology. It's a group of technologies that we put together, and I'm sure the panelists will talk about some of these as well in their daily lives. But there's two areas that I think that we use. There's data and there's physics. The physics is obviously bringing in the information. So if you think about autonomous vehicles or sensors that are actually ingesting the content. But then the data is manipulated by other technologies, and you'll see here the main ones that we're using. Search is actually one of the earliest AI technology. If you see what Google was doing with its relevancy ranking 10 years ago, it's amazing, and it's still considered to be artificial intelligence today. Machine learning is one of the most important technologies that underpins artificial intelligence, and that's not very well understood, and it's quite difficult to explain. So I want to use a small video, if it works, to explain how we see machine learning at Accenture, and we try and get people who are not particularly familiar with AI up to speed.
What is machine learning? Let's say you're about to face the big boss in a video game. You charge forward and get flattened. Next time, you might try pausing first and not getting flattened. You're learning and improving until finally you can beat the level. That's the idea behind machine learning, a form of artificial intelligence. Traditional computers can't fix problems on their own, but with machine learning, they can learn from past data, past results, and make better decisions in the future on lots and lots of scenarios at once to improve at incredible speeds. Ever get product recommendations when you shop with a retailer online? Notice that the suggestions tend to be pretty accurate? That's machine learning. The retailer's AI is always getting better at figuring out what you're likely to buy, even as your tastes evolve. Hope you enjoyed this human learning about machine learning.
So I really like that video because it very simply talks about what machine learning is, and that really underpins a lot of the things that you see around today. And I'm going to talk very quickly about some applications. If you look at the transportation experience, it's been completely disrupted with Uber. They're using machine learning. They're using all of the technologies that we talked about to enable us to go from what we used to do in 1998 to what we're doing today. If you look at the hospital waiting room experience, well, that's still the same. So there are some areas that really need to be disrupted, and there are people working on that kind of thing. Another great example that we've actually implemented that I think is very important is a customer that is putting people to work. So we talk about AI putting people out of work. We've used AI with a recruiter to enable them to understand a job, to understand a resume, and match candidates together. Now, obviously, there's all kinds of bias that you need to think about, but that is a machine learning natural language processing application that is AI, enabling us to find the right candidate for the job. Another example is a beer company. In the US, losing market share to craft brewers. They have harvested all kinds of consumer data from external sources. They've looked at internal sources. They've looked at social media, and they've been able to create new marketing campaigns to increase market share. Again, machine learning, using tons and tons of data to enable them to find patterns that will work for them. And finally, a video on one of our customers.
And as more data is collected, storage costs can grow exponentially to exceed millions of dollars. In fact, businesses can add terabytes of data to their servers every day. So it's easy to see how this all adds up. And over time, content can become redundant, stale, and outdated. Introducing Storage Optimization Analytics, Accenture's unique solution for reducing storage costs. Automate the classification and migration of data to less expensive cloud storage. while employing file-level traceability and real-time ROI tracking, leveraging search-based software applications. The solution provides IT departments, CIOs, and content owners with greater visibility into their enterprise storage systems and the ability to make more informed decisions about what data should be moved or deleted. In just a few clicks, data owners can access a dashboard view of their data footprint, enabling them to quickly remove unneeded data in accordance with all compliance and retention requirements. Manage data more efficiently, reduce storage costs, and start saving your enterprise millions with Storage Optimization Analytics from Accenture. Brought to you by the Search and Content Analytics practice of Accenture Applied Intelligence.
So that's an application that isn't obviously AI, but underneath there, we're looking at content. We're saying, hey, we don't need this content because it looks similar to this content. Natural language processing, machine learning, artificial intelligence in a very narrow use case. So hopefully that gives you a feel for how we practically see AI and where we've applied it. I'd like to now turn to the panel and get their perspective on some of the AI implementations that they're working on. So to start with, if we could just go around and talk about what your role is and what your responsibilities are in your respective organizations.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Jeet Papneja, Vice President at Nestle USA. And my role is, and in fact, the function that I belong to, we call it Enterprise Analytics. And the first question people ask us, like, what do you do? What does that mean? So that's where my role comes in, to really stand up and elevate this enterprise-wide analytics capability. So we are trying to create, and that's where I think I joined the company about 2 months ago. And that was one of the big motivation for me to join here, was we are looking analytics and AI holistically. Typically, any company you go to, like, they typically start with sales and marketing. Those are the usual suspects. But there are tons of opportunities in every function. You talked about hiring people. In fact, one of the things we are looking at in future is how we can create a DNA of a high potential or high performer employee. So you can use machine learning algorithms to find out what really drives the performance, what drives the potential. And if we can create an algorithm-driven DNA of a high performer, we can use that to recruit more people, even to train our people. So those are the things we are trying to look at across enterprise, from sales, from marketing, from supply chain, to demand, finance, any function you name it. There are huge opportunities in AI space, and that's where my role comes in. So we are focused on identifying those pockets of strength, identifying the opportunities, training the team, getting the buy-in from the organization, and make holistic analytics enterprise-wide.
Great, thank you. Rob.
Yes, I'm Rob Stewart. I'm the manager of Smart Grid and Technology for Pepco Holdings. So within that circle, we have Pepco, Delmarva Power, and Atlantic City Electric. And then, as you know, we're part of Exelon. So I am what's called the Utility Functional Area Manager for R&D and Innovation. So I am the liaison back to a peer group of other Exelon companies relative to research and development and innovation, so that we're constantly sharing. I lead a small team. We look at emerging technologies. So I kind of describe it as we're looking at the last 50 feet of the smart grid. So what are we bolting on to the capabilities that we've already established through previous investments? So that could be integration of electric vehicles, renewable energy, intelligent home area networks. How can we take advantage of the technology that's evolving? So I think, everybody recognizes the utility industry is going to see more change in the next 10 years than the last 100. And a lot of that is because of the intersection of commercial technologies with utility purpose. So I'll call out a couple things. EVs, electric vehicles, are one of them. Drones, another one. If we would have set out 10 years ago to have custom-built drones for us to use, it would have cost us millions of dollars. Now we can rely on off-the-shelf technologies and then enhance those technologies for utility purposes. So those are some examples. And while I can talk a little later on in the panel about some specific AI work that we're doing, for us, it's really, if you follow the journey of data, right? So we put these systems in, we're getting data from them, right? So the data leads to information leads to knowledge leads to insight. So then when you start to automate that insight, you start to look at artificial intelligence. So it's a natural progression of where we want to go. I wouldn't have talked about Skynet. My favorite is the HAL 9000. I don't think we're ever going to see a HAL 9000 run on the electric grid. But I think when you look at some of the pictures of the old Pan Am Clipper planes that flew across the ocean, you'd see 3 or 4 pilots in a cockpit with all this instrumentation, levers, and all kinds of things for them to watch. And today, 2 pilots can safely fly a twin-engine aircraft across the ocean because there's a whole lot of embedded intelligence going on that reduces the pilot workload. So what I think we would see is the control room operators of the future would have a reduced workload given a whole greater capability of device management and control. So that's a really quick snapshot, and I'm happy to go into more details.
Andrew, you're in the public sector,
Yes.
so what's your role and responsibility there?
Yes, before I get to that, may I just say, I see some people in the very far back who may not be able to see your wonderful faces, and I know there's some seats up here if anybody would like to come up, and if you cannot see the whole panel, feel free to come on down. My name is Andrew Trueblood. I'm the director of DC's Office of Planning. I think I have a little bit of a different role on this panel, which is as much kind of seeing what's happening, especially at the local and the municipal, the local level, as anything else. I will say I used to work in the Deputy Mayor's Office of Planning and Economic Development, and we did do some natural language processing around community feedback. And I think we're thinking about how we can better understand and quantify what we hear from residents, and that's something that we are thinking about in the Office of Planning, as well as how we can connect various data across our different systems of the city, whether it's housing, transportation, natural systems, our civic infrastructure, how we can use that and connect it to plan. And I think there's AI opportunities there, but that's not actually what I think my best value add role on this panel is. What I think my role is to think about how AI is affecting our cities and how we respond to it. I was able to help start up our autonomous vehicles working group in the district, where we talk about we bring together a number of agencies to think about the impacts of autonomous vehicles. And I think our role is to be skeptical supporters of this type of technology, to say, listen, we know AVs, autonomous vehicles are coming, but how do we make sure that they meet our goals, which include things like safety, which include things like privacy, and that might not be at the forefront of industry as they're thinking about some of these deployments. And you had mentioned Uber as an example, and I think that's actually a good example of where it is something good, but also Uber there's connections between Uber and increased congestion, Uber and decreased use of public transportation, and both of those things are not goals of our city.
Right.
So when these technologies are deployed, what tools can we use to make sure that we have the outcomes that we want to see?
So how are you working with some of the technology companies like Uber to try and make sure that it's a win-win situation?
It's an interesting. It's a great question. Our goal is to be not necessarily hostile. We know that Uber is something that many of us enjoy, and so our interest is not necessarily in shutting it down, but to be a good partner with them. I think so. So there's the idea, and this is the district is working with Ford, for example, as they deploy their autonomous vehicles. We're working with them. They're mapping the city right now and are working on deploying it within the city. And so the idea is through a kind of a relationship that is positive, we can also then talk about what the challenges are. I think at the same time, it's also incumbent on us, on industry, on everybody to look at the federal level too. I think some of these issues around privacy or data security or cybersecurity really require the scope of national resources and national standards. Us creating one standard and then another city or state creating a different standard can actually be problematic in and of itself. So thinking about how we work together at all the different levels of government is another way that we're thinking about how to address these issues.
That's great. You're in the consumer products business. I mean, what would your advice be to somebody in your space? Where would you target this technology to get the best bang for the buck, if you like?
I would say everywhere. And again, we have to be mindful of the opportunities and prioritize the ones which we think can add value in the near term, and also thinking about the long term. I think what's key and very important is to not rush to do some scientific experiments. So I think the one thing we say that we are not here to run scientific experiments. We are here to drive business growth. We are here to make a difference in the way business is done or the way decisions are made in the company. It's not about technology, it's about the business impact. And that's where I think it's important to start to ensure that we have the right enablers in place. You cannot just rush to do some POC or pilot and say, oh, we have done some AI projects and that's it. It doesn't really move the needle. And that's where I see tons of companies really struggling with dabbling. The dabbling, they're saying, yeah, we have done tons of pilot, but nothing much has happened in terms of impact in the business. And that's where the approach we have taken here at Nestle is that we said, let's first put the right enablers. And we identify 5 big enablers which are important to make a difference. So first thing is to get a top management buy-in. Right. If your management is not aligned to what you're trying to do, it's not going to happen. So, and that we have. So we have secured that management. We have a monthly meeting with Steerco, regular meeting with the executive leadership board. So everything is in plan, and they have full support. We have full support of our plans there. So that's the first enabler. The second thing is to ensure that we have a sophisticated data strategy in place. You have to have a data strategy in place and data governance protocol in place to identify what data we have in the system, how it's being used, what gaps we have. Unless you have that, nothing will move. So that's the second piece. The third piece is to have a portfolio of AI opportunities. If you think in a narrow way, like typically people start with sales or marketing, but you may identify there are better opportunities maybe in supply chain, better opportunity in finance. So you have to identify the portfolio of opportunities enterprise-wide and then talk to all function. And what we have done at Nestle is that we have created a beautiful network called Champions Network. So we have identified each one person from each function who is part of our Champions Network, and we are collectively deciding which opportunity we should go after. And that's, again, is a very important piece to have a portfolio view of the enterprise opportunities and prioritize together. So we are putting the money on the right bet or big bets. That's the third thing or fourth thing. And the last thing is about having the right people in the job, where we are looking at not just our people from analytics side, but entire organization. So how we raise the analytics acumen of the entire organization. So that's another big piece. So once you have these 5 enablers in place and you have alignment on which big bets we to focus on, you have a roadmap for priorities, it's much easier task than doing some POC, a random POC here and there.
And Rob, in your organization, slightly different mandate, how do you prioritize where you spend your time with these technologies? Because as you said, you could do a million things. But.
Sure. I mean, our mission is and will always be the safe, reliable, and efficient delivery of electric energy. I mean, that's who we are. We're a provider of electric service. So, it easily divides up into areas that can improve worker safety, areas that can improve efficiencies. And then I think when we look towards the future, we realize that building big substations it may not necessarily be the first choice. So how can we better use all of the technologies that are out there? We're seeing huge penetration of solar. I think amongst the PHI companies, we've got 67,000 net energy meter customers. So these are rooftop solar customers that are connected to our grid. So how do we enable that? There are physical challenges. You talked about physics. So our business, the underpinnings of it is ruled by the laws of physics. So whatever we try to legislate or regulate, physics prevails. So we just need to remember that the fact that we're moving energy and sometimes things go wrong, sometimes things wear out and fuses blow, trees contact things. So resiliency, any kind of technologies that improve resiliency, reliability are first and foremost. Technologies that will allow for more adoption of distributed energy resources. So that's anything that can generate, not just solar, battery storage, any other storage technologies. So when I take a look at the future, if it can generate energy or use energy, I want to know what it is and how I can use it to make the grid perform better. And I think that's what we're looking at. Everybody here is driven with their cruise control on, I would assume, in your car. And while that seems like it's a really smooth ride behind the scenes, there are micro changes going on to throttle positioning and everything based on the road, which gives you the sense of that smooth ride. So when we look at what the management of the grid is in the future, it could be a whole bunch of different loads and sources that we're all orchestrating together to make sure that everybody gets the highest reliability and efficient electric service possible. So I think that's where we're looking. So we kind of have a couple of initiatives. One's in the digital worker. So that's how can we make the workforce more effective? How can we give them information that's right at their fingertips? So we're looking at some visual technologies. We're looking at biometric sensing, or vests and other things that can cool a worker on a hot day or warm a worker on a cool day. I mean, remember, our workforce is out there when the temperature's below zero and out there when it's 100 degrees. They're working. So can we tell when they're potentially going to be at risk physically from those weather conditions, and at least tell them, hey, you need to get down, you need to get water. So looking at all those different aspects as well. So I think when it gets back to it, it's really how can we improve the way we deliver our energy? How can we make it safer, more reliable, and more efficient use of all of our assets?
Great. I'd like to throw the questioning out to the audience. So if there are any questions that you have for the panel, please raise your hand and we can take some questions.
This is a question from the gentleman from PHI. I'm very involved with electric vehicles, and I posed a question to both BGE and PHI. Your business plan is basically selling more kilowatt hours. I mean, that's the way it's been for decades. Number one, is that going to change? Number two, if that in fact is still your business case, why has not Exelon invested in electric vehicle chargers across the board to be able to sell more kilowatt hours?
So interesting. Yeah, I mean, and I'll speak for PHI first. We're decoupled in a lot of the different regions that we have. And so that allows us to do demand response programs as well to encourage customers to conserve energy. So the question of kilowatt hour sales is not at the forefront. It's really delivering customer value and services. We see customers wanting to adopt electric vehicles, and we see that the impact of electric vehicles in single instances, not so great. In large volumes, like in Maryland, where they've adopted the zero emission vehicle mandate, 300,000 vehicles could make a big impact. So where those vehicles charge could make an impact to our distribution system. So for us, initially, it's about allowing our customers to make the decisions that they want to make and be there to serve them at minimal impact to the distribution system. So better understanding how can we get in front of a potential wave of load or pockets of load. I love EVs, you know that. We look at multi-unit dwellers. They're a nationally an underserved market for EVs, right? It's tough to get chargers at apartments and condominiums, but yet a lot of those folks could drive them. So you may not be able to meet that need for the customers with chargers on site at their facilities. The District of Columbia, for instance, I think 70% of the residents of the district live in apartments and condominiums. So neighborhood depot charging is probably going to be a solution for a lot of those different customers, which looks like a regular service station, multiple chargers, and they're all really high power chargers, which can charge the vehicles in a short period of time. You put 8 or 10 of those together, you get a megawatt of point source load. That's a lot of load for us. And so you don't just stick that anywhere. So for us, we want to better understand where we're going to see that evolution of need, and then how can we serve that. There may be microgrid technologies that we're looking at now, some small efficient generation, some energy storage, different items that we can co-locate with that charging to help reduce that load impact on the local distribution system. So for us, it's a matter of understanding the future need and then being there with solutions that we can accommodate that need for it. And I guess the question for the EV charging infrastructure is, why haven't the automakers in the US invested in it like Tesla have? I mean, they have a vested interest in moving electric vehicles. And so I think, your question on Exelon may be appropriate, but for us, it's serving the customer needs. It's not incentivizing a market. So for that, I would ask the OEMs why they're not getting out there and putting in electric vehicle charging to better move the markets for their own vehicles is just as appropriate of a question.
Great, thank you. And any other questions from the audience at the back there? I don't know if we have a microphone.
How are you? My name is Shauna Blake. I work for the Department of Employment Services, and we help to connect DC residents to jobs and infrastructure. We actually have a partnership with Pepco. And my question for you is, what trainings and partnerships should I be looking to develop to prepare DC residents for jobs in AI?
Maybe Andrew, you might be the best person to at least take that one first.
Well, yeah, as a colleague in some ways with DOS, I would say, I think our partnership, the district's partnership with Ford is another example. Ford is another part of the Infrastructure Academy. And that's a good example of the changing workforce. So we know we're likely to be the Ubers, drivers, taxi drivers, that at some point in your future is going to be less of an opportunity, but there will be opportunities still in fixing up the cars, maintaining them, reading, doing the data analysis. And so when Ford came in, we said this is a critical issue for the District of Columbia, is thinking about how we transition the workforce and how can we partner, which you guys with the Department of Employment Services has, how can you partner with Department of Employment Services to help the district train our residents towards the jobs that you're looking for, whether it's on the mechanic side or whether it's on the data side. And I'd love to hear actually from these guys as well, but I do think one theme that came out of I think everybody is you have to partner until you hit that point, until you hit
125 years, maybe.
You need that human connection with that data connection. And one of the key questions I have about AI is you have a training set. It is trained on the past. And it doesn't necessarily, it can kind of look into the future, but how well it can understand the future based on its training set. And we've seen lots of examples of AI gone wrong because of that. You hear about Waze directing people through residential neighborhoods, large numbers of cars through residential neighborhoods. So I think that's where you need that human intermediary. You need the people who can kind of understand and look and test that data and figure out what might be missing. But anyway, I'd love to hear from you all about if you were to suggest the kind of training that you think would be helpful at all levels, not only for people with computer science degrees, but even people who might be looking for associate's degrees or other.
Yeah, how is Nestle training its workforce for the future?
Sure, and in fact, we are hiring aggressively as well. I'm looking at like 10 people in my team alone, looking at people with AI experience, machine learning experience. I would say what we look for and kind of skills we need, what differentiate from the past different analytics platform that we had in the past. So AI can be very useful in two big areas. So one is and we all talk about predictive engine, right? And so as you know, the analytics has 4 stages we all talk about, and descriptive, which is more about looking at the past, which a lot of other things can tell you what has happened. It can tell you why it has happened, but what should happen is where I think we are still pretty thin. So there's a lot of work happening at Nestle, and I'm sure in other companies in our space, is to identify and do the scenario planning. So identify the drivers, identify the causal relationship, identify what's going to happen in future based on all the inputs that we get in terms of trends, in terms of technology change, in terms of changes in consumer demands, consumer needs, and all the exposure consumers are getting in today's world. So how we can leverage analytics and AI to really predict the future and do the scenario planning, which is where it becomes powerful for a business person. And we are looking at, in one of the way, we are looking at what we call digitization of a business strategy. So we are looking at end-to-end digitizing business strategy and arming our executives with kind of a cockpit or what I call decision command center. So where machines will tell you that what to do. So what I call is machine-informed human-decided decision making. So machine should tell you what to do based on all the data we have. Machine should tell you the scenarios which are best for your business, and you take a decision. I think that's the way it's going to change the future. And that's where the biggest opportunity will come in. That's how we can fast track our decision making. So if we can really leverage AI for scenario planning, optimization, prediction, and one fine day even get to the last stage of analytics, as we call it, the prescriptive analytics. So machines should tell you what you should be doing based on patterns they detect, signals they detect, based on connecting the dots. And AI should be what we call living and breathing engine. If you're using AI for a static dashboard, you're wasting the effort. You're wasting the power of it. You should focus at what it can do about the future. It should tell you what to do and how better to do. It should give you the options and suggestions to work on, and you take a decision based on that. So if you use AI for prediction, for scenario planning, optimization, and pattern detection, that's where we have the biggest opportunity.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, the gentleman from Nestle's, you're in 130 countries. You're worldwide, I mean, you're big. Based on your data analytics, what do you see as the biggest challenges for Nestle's over the next 10 years, short term?
So one big challenge for Nestle, and I would say any company in consumer goods space, is two big challenge, I would say. One is to, which you always had, to identify consumers' unmet needs and see how we can best prepare our consumers for future. That's one. And second is personalized solutions. So technology has really given us opportunity which we never had before to what we call personalization at scale. So we are working on really creating micro segments, like thousands of micro segments, identifying consumers' need based on all the data, based on behavioral data, what we get from online and offline space, connect them together and be able to arm consumers with the right solution they need. That's one. And also at the same time, there's a lot happening in the environment space. So there's a lot of focus on, in fact, one of the products we have called Sweet Earth, which is one of the best-selling plant-based protein products. And how we really tap into consumers' need, consumer demand, consumers' desire for organic product, consumer desire for plant-based product, and create solution to meet those needs. So what Nestle, we stand for good food, good life. So how do we ensure that consumers are getting the great taste in a naturally sustainable way? So that's again a big area. We're looking at water conservation, ensuring that we reduce the plastic usage. So a lot of work is happening on sustainability part. A lot of work is happening on identifying consumers' need and providing personalized solution to them.
If I could just go back to the question of workforce, because we haven't response to that as well. I mean, we certainly support the training academies. We're looking at getting, we need linemen. The linemen that we have, it's a graying workforce, so we need the linemen of the future. We don't know necessarily what all of the requirements of linemen of the future is, but I think we need at least the entry point of the workforce today would include the IT skills naturally that we would need to start to see and what a lineman might do. And that means interfacing more in the field with equipment, using computers to program, to create settings. But that lineman of the future is something that the whole utility industry is working on because I think it's a situation across all of it. So I've told my kids, even to my wife's reaction that, hey, if you don't feel like going to college, you don't have to go to college, right? There's a lot of jobs that you can do that don't require a college degree. Being a lineman is one of them. And people don't realize it takes 7 years to train a lineman. You can become a doctor quicker than you become a lineman. But once you become a lineman where you're able to actually go out on the system and operate independently, it's a great career. It's a great career to have. It's not without risk. But firefighters, police officers, other first responders have risk related to their work too. We address those risks with embedded safety and training and making sure that we're constantly creating as safe of a work environment as possible for those workers. But it's getting that workforce in at the ground level for us. It's also at the engineer level. I had a master's degree in power systems. Very few universities offer degrees in power systems anymore. We went through a period of time where power systems just wasn't sexy and students wanted to go in other directions. Now it's becoming popular again because of everything that we're seeing, all the change that's coming at it again. So we're trying to work with a core set of universities to create some new power systems courses of the future that would include cybersecurity training and other aspects that engineers would need to know to continue to build this intelligent network, this utility network system out. So I think it's from the top end, from the bottom, we're working in those areas.
One question, just as a follow-up. The linemen that you currently have, what's happening to train them to be the linemen of the future? As opposed to just the new ones that we want to...
I mean, we are training them and we are working with the unions. Right now we have multiple people from multiple areas of the company that have to show up at a single location in order to activate a piece of equipment. So in the future, I think we think it's efficient that the workforce should be able to accommodate a lot of that. I don't want to get into any union discussions, but I think ultimately you need to have that capability, and specifically the situational awareness that comes from just having it, so that hey, I don't plug in a computer to this system and then try to plug in a different connection to a different system when those two systems aren't interconnected, right? What are you doing from a cybersecurity perspective, and what kind of threats are you potentially going to expose that equipment to? So making sure that the workforce all has that situational awareness.
Yeah, and I would love to add on the workforce piece that I get reminded on. In fact, we have made it almost like a mandated that, especially in our kind of functions, AI and analytics driven roles, that everybody has to have a mix of these 4 skills. So talking about your specific skills there, and it's funny that quite often we don't find people who have the mix of these 4. So these 4 are data skills, technology skills, analytics or AI skills, and business skills. So all 4 are important in today's world. And that's where we have the biggest gap. So you'll find tons of people who are really great analysts, but they hardly understand how business is done, how decisions are made, how analytics are being used for. So the first question I asked to anybody talking about like any AI or analytics use cases, so I said, tell me what impact it created to the business. And they're like, I don't know. I said, can you tell me what decision was taken based on this data? I don't know. Yeah. What are you doing? So unless you are able to connect the dots, and again, not everybody needs same kind of mix. If you're hiring people for a data or technology job, they will have a higher quotient on data side. So I said, if you split 100 out of those 4 skills, so I mandate like everybody has to have 20 to 30% focus on business skills, because that's where you convert business requirements into technical needs and vice versa. So everybody has to have like 20% or so on business skills. Rest you can be based on your function, based on your role. It could be high on data, high on analytics, high on technology, but you need to have a mix of these 4. Then you can be what I call whole brain analyst or whole brain researcher. Right. Like today's world, you cannot be like left brain or right brain. You have to have mix of both depending on the role you are going to play, but you have to have mix of these 4.
And when we merged with Exelon, we were gifted with an innovation program that had already been established by the other Exelon utilities that we were able to just step right into. And so there's a big focus within all of the Exelon companies to mine employee innovation and to create a culture of innovation within the workforce itself. Yeah. So that's a questioning attitude. It's any good ideas that you can have. How can I improve my work? How can, what's the next widget that, I work in the field and this could be something that could be helpful for us. Some of these things might have intellectual property opportunities. Some of these are just improvements to the way work gets done. But we have an overall system in which we capture all of those ideas. I manage a team that looks at those ideas and vets them. Which ones do we move forward? We have what we call ambassadors across the company. That's every business unit has an ambassador. So if an idea affects a business unit, that ambassador takes it. We work on it. We decide, is it something that we can move forward or not move forward? And we're seeing a lot of really good ideas that are coming forward from the workforce themselves. So I think that's going to be probably imperative for most companies as they move forward, is how do I capture the innovation of the workers that are doing the work? They got pretty good ideas on how to do the work better, and I want to hear from them. And so we have a whole rewards program associated with if these innovation ideas come to fruition and actually create savings for the company, then we reward the workers appropriately.
Yeah. So Andrew, in your role in DC operations, I mean, how closely are you looking at these same kinds of things in the public sector?
I think that it's interesting. I was thinking about that on the way here. I mentioned a few small examples, but in many cases, I'm not sure we have the same level of kind of data infrastructure. We do have an Office of the Chief Technology Officer who's in charge of looking across our enterprises. And they have a data catalog, but what's interesting is our focus, with much of that, is how do we make it open data? How do we then allow citizens or stakeholders or companies to use that data rather than how do we harvest it internally? But I think we're getting to a world where we need to be moving in that direction. And it's interesting, in the examples, we talked about workforce. On the one side, you have kind of the very analog workforce that needs some level of data technical skills because they could be the weakest link in a cybersecurity, a potential threat. And on the other side, you have a very high data skill that needs some level of business or analog or basic skills, so that they're not just out there mashing up data to mash up data and finding things that aren't particularly useful. And so it's that interaction. I think what we need to do in government is to think about, as we bring on staff, how we bring on folks who have maybe a little more of that data science, data background, and then how do we train our frontline staff, whether that's someone in the permitting office, whether that's someone in my office in planning, to make sure that they have those skills so that our data is strong and that we can use it effectively. I'll just say, as if I'm thinking about what we're trying to do in the Office of Planning, which is to think about how is this city a vibrant, healthy city for us in 20 years and for our children and grandchildren in 40 years. What we need to, our city, as I mentioned before, is a series of systems, and we don't always understand how they interface with each other and how they interact, and our ability to scenario plan is very basic. But what happens is, we do things like create economic development strategies that help our city grow, and then we have a housing issue on the other side. And so how can we better think about creating strategies that help that are important for our city to grow, but also then address the potential challenges or stresses or shocks that are created in other systems, whether that's infrastructure, transportation, natural systems, or others.
Just staying with you, Andrew, I've heard the term smart cities quite a lot.
Yes.
And I saw a presentation from Chicago, I think. So
yes.
Where are we in the DC area as it relates to smart city?
It's a great question, and I like that you say DC area, because I think as with housing, for example, the way to do it successfully is regionally. Drawing a border on Western Avenue between DC and Maryland doesn't really work, or on the Potomac Avenue with Virginia. And the Greater Washington Board of Trade is actually leading a pretty significant regional effort to look at smart cities. I think we have all evolved from a world in which smart city was like dropping a proprietary sensor somewhere and knowing, how much trash is in the trash can there, which is one of those things that's like, it's kind of cool, but it's really not solving a problem we have. To how do we leverage all of these, not only data sources, but other infrastructure and transportation, and how do we think about all of these components of a city in a way that can help us better address issues that we have, that our businesses have, that our residents have. And I think the work of the Greater Washington Board of Trade is a good example. Within the District of Columbia, it's being led out of our Chief Technology Officer's office, and they're working on a smarter city, which is making sure we have the infrastructure, both the private infrastructure, but also the government infrastructure to support those efforts, because that's what we see ourselves as, kind of building the rails on which all of that can run. And maybe there are opportunities to improve services, municipal services, but I think it's as important to think about the use cases for other stakeholders as it is for the government's benefit.
So let's
I had a question in regard to that, the development of like a smart city strategy. Is that being done in conjunction with other agencies in DC? Like, for instance, I know in Singapore there has been technology put into the traffic lights so that older people or people with young children, they have a little card, it swipes, and the light is a lot longer. Is this being done in conjunction with, sort of like the Office of Aging and other kinds of, or is it really just being done sort of more just looking at the technology aspect of it?
No, it's very much, there's a working group that's working on it both within, there's a working group in DC, and then the Greater Washington Board of Trade has an even broader working group that's thinking about all of these different kind of use cases and pillars and how they interact. I think one thing to put a plug in for the district government is we are fortunate, we're unfortunate that we don't have any representation in Congress, but we are fortunate that we are a city, a county, and a state. So we can bring all of the levels of regulation and all of the levels of governance and legislation in alignment. And that's why we found, working, for example, with Ford, they didn't have to worry about the state battling with the city about who could regulate it. And our state DOT is our city Department of Transportation. And so we think that's a benefit that we have as the district in terms of how we can deploy these things. these opportunities. Final thing I'll just say, this is kind of a personal view on smart cities, which is I think cities have always been smart. They are the most effective tool of economic growth and vibrance and inclusion of anything that humans have created. And I'm an urban planner, so I say this. I think cities are kind of the epitome of that. That is how we have advanced as civilizations, is through the agglomeration of people and economies and intelligence. And so I bristle a little bit at the smart cities designation. I think it's more about it's interconnected systems, it's intelligent systems. It's better utilizing that digital layer on top of all of those analog layers that I mentioned before.
I think there was another question here.
Yeah, so I'm just curious as it relates to AVs. A lot of automobile companies, they have poured a lot of money into acquiring some type of AI software for autonomous vehicles. And there's a big push in trying to get the vehicles in the next 3 or 4 years. Do you think that's too of an ambitious goal, especially in larger cities, to kind of get these vehicles on the road in the next 3 or 4 years?
A very good one for you, Rob.
I don't know about that. There's a lot of standards involved. There's a lot, the safety requirements that would need to be met. I'm optimistic about that technology. And I don't know from a utility perspective, from using AI or using autonomous vehicles, but boy, I want to charge them. So, I think autonomous vehicles, and I'll tell you why. I think autonomous vehicles are going to change the paradigm of our relationship with our car. It doesn't have to sit out front anymore. It can go somewhere else when I don't need it, and it can come when I do. If I'm a vehicle cab driver, for instance, I can operate multiple vehicles and still drive my own. It's not necessarily going to put me out of business. So I think it's looking at that opportunity and how it's going to affect transportation. But what you don't want to have is a bunch of people's vehicles circling the building all day long because they're at work and they don't want to pay for parking. So I think there's some logistics that still need to be worked out for that. But from a utility perspective, if you look at an autonomous vehicle, I don't need an attendant in a garage. I can rack and stack vehicles as tightly as I can because nobody has to get in or out of them. And if I can charge those vehicles or connect them to the grid, then I can also discharge those vehicles. So now I'm seeing a place that vehicles can live like a hive, and then they get dispatched out when they need. And so they're charged optimally, and they're discharged in ways that support the grid. So now whenever you need that vehicle, if it's not there, it's parked somewhere and it's charging, it's providing grid support to the grid in a whole new way. I think that's a really exciting aspect of the autonomous vehicles that we see.
Thank you for that question. So I want to talk finally about ethical AI, right?
Yeah.
We hear a lot about the ethics around AI. You mentioned the ways, the example. I talked about the recruitment company that we worked with that's matching jobs to candidates. Obviously, there could be some inherent bias. There could be outright bias. At Accenture, we have people dedicated to looking at the ethics of the AI that we build, not just for ourselves, but for our customers. What are you doing at Nestle when you're looking at building AI? Obviously, there's a million things you can do there. Mm-hmm. How do you layer in whether we should be doing those things?
Yeah, so again, and that's where the enterprise view really becomes very powerful. So we have in the Champions Network, we were talking earlier, we have a team representative from legal, from HR, even like planning side, strategy team, so they're all part of the same. So whenever we have monthly meeting to look at, these are the 10 potential areas we could focus on next year, and they say, oh, these two doesn't make sense from ethics point of view, or from governance point of view, from legal point of view. So everything we are pretty buttoned up, so as to say, without really jumping the gun and say, okay, let's go and get that done. So we are connected and making sure that we're doing the right things in the right way and focusing on the right big bets.
Great.
So, I'll start at the basic. We have always been a big advocate for customer data privacy, right? We've been getting customer data ever since we put the first electric meter out there, and protecting account information and all of that. So none of that changes. Everything that we would do in the future would still have the same rigid customer data privacy. So, but if we can get information from an EV charger to better understand EV demands, and we can strip the PII, or the personal identifiable information, out of it, then that's the data that we can then use to start to build more intelligent solutions going forward. So for us, we would not move any data around without pulling out the PII of it,
Right.
so that we're constantly protecting the customer's data. And then we'd still be careful how we shared that data overall, because if that data gave insight into our distribution system in a way that could expose vulnerabilities that someone could exploit. I mean, these are all the things. We still serve power to the nation's capital. We still have to be aware and responsible that there are people that would love to disrupt the power to the nation's capital. And every day we've got folks within the company that are watching for any instances of those types of activities. So at the onset, we just need to make sure that we're building these layers of defense around these different critical systems that are going to ultimately be controlling our future distribution of electricity.
How about the algorithms that you're building for AI? They have an output, right? And so you've got data that goes in, you have an output, and there's a black box in the middle. I guess the question is, how do you police that? I mean, we have the same issues over at Accenture. I'm just curious as to how do you police that we should actually be using the results that came out the black box?
Yeah, I'll say carefully. We have a whole corporate security group that would look at it from a security perspective, but then we have a corporate innovation team. So I have an innovation team at the PHI level, BG&E, Pico, ComEd, all have it. There's a corporate innovation team as well that's looking at machine learning. I think I mentioned right now we're actively doing machine learning around drone images that we capture. We're flying drones now for reliability flights, but we want to be able to take those images and very quickly scan through all of them, or even live stream video, and identify hotspots on the system. Do we see a broken cross arm? Do we see a connector that's getting hot? Can we identify vegetation, right? Through visual technologies, we can look at what the tree species are. Through infrared, we can look at the health of the trees. So now we can fly a distribution system very quickly, say, what are the different trees? What are the known growth rates of the trees? Are they healthy? Are they not healthy? And now I paint a more tighter and more efficient picture of my vegetation management needs than to just trim because it's on a cycle. We're doing that now. It's very effective, but I think we could do it differently and better in the future. And in advance of a hurricane, we could do very quick flights. We could figure out where are my hotspots, send crews out there to do feeder hardening in specific areas to make the distribution system more resilient if we have a known event that's coming. So I mean, I think that's where everything is headed. Is the fact that we're going to be using more and more of that information to automate it. We have some distribution automation schemes that are pretty smart. They operate independently, but they'll include multiple substations, multiple feeders. If we identify a fault or a short circuit, it'll automatically isolate around that fault and close ties in to supply as many of those customers as possible. It does it in seconds, like 52 seconds. So shorter than a person in a control room could actually identify that we've had a problem. Our automated systems can actually take steps to reduce the number of customers affected. But the number of electric vehicles that come and go on the system, the penetration of solar and whether you're a peak sun or not is going to change a lot of those variables. So we're going to need to adapt with that because we don't want to sit there and say a car hits a pole, all the solar customers drop off because there's a momentary outage and all of their inverters are supposed to drop off for safety reasons. Now we see twice the load that we were normally serving because it was being served by solar. That's real for us as operators of the grid. And then we have to be able to adapt to that. So making sure that we're thinking through all these things carefully because the law of unintended consequences is real and it's severe.
Exactly.
And so we want to make sure that before we move too far forward that we're making sure it's the right steps.
So Andrew, this must be a big topic for your organization, right? Ethical AI and how best to implement that. What are the sorts of things you guys are looking at, thinking about?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. As government, we are a little probably more conservative in how we think about things, and obviously have a whole number of concerns around privacy and cybersecurity. As the nation's capital, we obviously have a whole host of threats at the local level. But I think one observation I have on this conversation is I think there's a different level of scrutiny required if you're looking at humans versus trees, right? The risk of a false positive or false negative on a tree line or on something that is not a human is a little, you can accept it a little bit more. I mean, the worst case scenario is you lose, you have have to then go deal with something manually. Whereas, skipping over a human because of some inherent bias is a little bit more problematic. And so I do think it requires us looking at what we're doing, depending on the nature of the analysis and what we're looking at. So even something like a hiring algorithm is probably actually more sensitive from an ethical perspective than yours, even though yours might actually have implications for millions of people. So I think that's, and it gets back to the conversation earlier of this melding of technology with humans, and you talked about business, but I think there's also an ethical, there's an ethical frame there that we have to be thinking about. Is this something? What is the machine missing that I can bring to this, and why? And I think a healthy skepticism and encouraging it, whether it's in the government we kind of naturally have that, but I think everywhere that skepticism, that encouraging people to kind of push back and to ask questions, I think is really critical as we are still learning how all of this works.
Yeah, I mean, at Accenture, I can tell you that we have a person, managing director, her name's Ruman Chowdhury. She's dedicated to looking at the ethics of what Accenture does around AI, whether that's an internal recruiting algorithm or whether it's what we're doing for our customers. And so she will help our customers and clients look at the ethics of what they're actually building. And you're right, when it impacts human beings, then the implications are so much more severe. When we worked with the recruitment company, they had an army of people looking at the algorithms to make sure that there wasn't inherent bias. And they were looking at things like, well, what is the data that we're gathering, right? We're gathering resumes from decades. Well, if you go back decades, there were certain kinds of people who weren't in certain kinds of jobs. Not many females were in IT jobs 40, 50 years ago. And that creates an inherent bias because you've got more males in the corpus. So they had to take all of that into account when trying to match these jobs. So I think it's a hugely important area.
And if there's real quick time, I just want to go back to the point on smart cities and mention that, PHI and Exelon, both, we call it connected communities, not smart cities. We recognize cities have other issues to address, but I talked earlier about the fact of reliability, resiliency, integration of DER, electrification. All of that leads to a functionality of a smarter connected community. And so we've got a 10-year plan for how do we enable that functionality in each of the different cities we serve. We're looking to work with the district and others on how to implement that strategy.
Great. Well, I think we're just about out of time here, so I'd like to finish by thanking the panelists for their fantastic insights and their participation in today, and thank you all for attending this session. Thank you.
So folks, we're going to break for coffee from 10